wanted to talk about risk and what that means to me in terms of somebody that has studied this for a long time and really tried to take a deep dive into understanding learning from failure and risk. And I think it's a very important phenomenon in terms of understanding what it is. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people to help me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward to help you out as much as I possibly can. So for understanding risk, generally what we need is a large population of people, and we need to see how something affects that large population of people, where what we're really looking at for the most part is really simple. All we're looking at is the number of people that have been affected by something and the number of people that are in the population. And that gives you a basic estimate of what that risk is. And now we can look at sort of different ways to measure this in terms of standard deviation and all sorts of stuff. But really what we're trying to look at and try to get an estimate for is the number of times that something happens, something traditionally bad happens, but it could be a very positive thing that happens where we have upside risk. And we look at how many times that actually is going to happen in a population, and what is your probability, quote unquote probability, that that negative thing is going to happen or positive thing that's going to happen. Most of the time when we talk about risk, what we're trying to do is put an estimate on the negative things happening. And I think that is a very real thing that happens today in terms of the current political discussion that's going on right now, is that we all have different perceptions of risk in terms of what is going on in the world around us. When is the summer of 2020 and a global pandemic is going on, actually it's the fall of 2020 and a global pandemic is going on, and we all have different perceptions of what that global pandemic looks like and what it's supposed to be. And that is called subjective probabilities, where we all try to estimate based on our gut feelings, based on what is going on in our immediate vicinity. Each individual person is trying to estimate what the actual probability is of this event happening to me, where a global pandemic, the COVID-19, actually affects you. And it's a difficult thing for most of us to actually make these decisions, because what we're doing, for the most part, because we're human beings and we're individuals, we generalize based on what we see in the news around us, whether we look at, it's the news reportings, for example, or we gather information from our immediate friends and family. So we tend to weight that a lot heavier, where we look at our immediate friends and family a lot more, and we see what they're trying to do and what they're doing, what their perceptions are. So if you don't have somebody that is cautious in your family, you have a very high tendency to not be cautious in your family with that particular thing. That's why we tend to see people that smoke and their kids will smoke and whatnot. It'll continue to pass on. There's lots of inheritance that happens with risky behaviors. If you are in a gang, for example, you're more likely to do risky, dangerous, violent behaviors than you're not in that gang. A street gang, a sort of violent street gang, because you see other people doing that and it becomes normalized. So the reason why I'm talking about this at this moment, I'm listening to Gerd Gigerenzer's book, Risk Savvy, and it's an interesting book. Gerd Gigerenzer is a very, very famous, I would put him as an economist / psychologist. And the book is quite interesting because it's trying to explain how we are very bad at making these estimates of the world around us in terms of risk and how we understand risk. And that's a really important concept to sort of understand. We are, generally as human beings, we're terrible at understanding risk. We can sort of forecast a little bit, but we're terrible at forecasting in general. There's been a long line of research starting with Herbert Simon that has sort of looked at how not very good we are at sort of predicting and understanding our surroundings based on available information, because we don't have that available information for the most part, and we can't process all of that available information. It's very, very hard. We're not computers to process all of that available information. And even computers themselves have limitations. And that's why you start seeing bigger and bigger computers in this world, because we're trying to account for those limitations. It's never going to wear out. There's always going to be more demand for these larger computers. So my point is I think, listening to the book, I'm only about halfway in, really just sort of starting in the book. And, I think he is making a proponent that we should be a little bit more risky with some of our behaviors. And that is fine. I get that judgment. I get where we're coming from. But what I'm seeing at this moment is that it is a little bit more difficult to do some of those those risky behaviors. And what I would suggest as somebody that studies technology is that why not use the available technologies that we have and rely on those available technologies, whether they're very simple, like wearing a mask, for instance, or something a little bit more complicated, like information technology that we have right now, like Zoom, and try to substitute as much as we can and moderate as much as we can the effects, the risk behaviors that we have. So what we have generally when we experience sort of a risky event and how we sort of determine risk, we often make sort of a reference point in what we understand what the risk behavior is and what we're trying to do. So if our goal behavior, and Zero Shapira and March, Jim March actually talked about this, if we have a performance criteria, what we're looking for and we're trying to optimize on is performance, so whether we can go faster, harder, actually trying to make more money, that kind of stuff, we are going to we're going to have a tendency to behave in one way in terms of that risk or performance aspiration that we have, versus if we have another mechanism or another goal that we're sort of focused on. If we're focused on survival, then we're going to behave in a much different way, and we're probably going to be a lot less risk-seeking at that moment because we're worried about our survival. And I think that's really what's going on with the conversation that's going on at this moment with the global pandemic, is we're having conversations about what is our goal at this moment, what are we going to prioritize, and what are we going to be focusing on based on our own estimates of what that risk is and how we behave with that risk that we actually have. Right, so if we're focused on performance at this moment, which is some people are looking at the global stock market, for example, and seeing how the stock market is actually going to behave, then maybe we should be a little bit more risky and not worry about the consequences. But if we're focused on survival, our own individual survival and in sort of changing the survival chances of other people around you, then we might behave in a different way. So what my suggestion is in terms of dealing with risk and understanding what risk is the first thing I'm going to say is what we often have to sort of think about is how we can substitute with available technologies that we have. That's the best sort of solution that we have to mitigate risks, which goal that you have, and always try to default to mitigate that risk with that technology that we actually have. And the second thing is to increase our sort of subjective probability in what that risk actually looks like. So this is where you get better information, and information that is more reliable. And as well, if you have family members that behave in a certain way, well, try to triangulate that risk understanding and talk to other people and get information from others around you that maybe have a different opinion, and try to be as open as you can. I know in this political climate, it's really tricky to be like that, to be open and to look at both sides of the story. But that's the way that I deal with these things. I try to look at both sides. And if I can, in terms of mitigating my downside risk with having the most upside risk potential, what I try to do is use available technologies, wearing a mask, not exposing myself to others as much as I can. That sounded weird, but making sure that I'm social distancing, making sure that I'm using information technology as much as I can, because who knows? We don't really have that we don't have a real good estimate for each individual person what that risk is going to be for you, because what we have is an estimate at the population level. We don't have what that risk is going to be for you individually. Nobody understands what their underlying conditions are at this moment. The only way that you find out you have underlying conditions is if you're exposed to something and you stress test, and then you realize, oop, I have that underlying condition, I'm that one, and I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to hurt somebody else by doing that. So in terms of me understanding this, in terms of my professorial duties and understanding and all that kind of goofy stuff, and I'm not trying to make fun of it, but I try to mitigate my downside risk. I behave as if I'm a company and try to mitigate my downside risk by using available technologies as much as I can, and then as well try to get the best available information so I can make better decisions. All right, so that's all I'm going to talk about with this, and hopefully you like this talk, and we will see you. Oh, give me a thumbs up. Very much appreciate it. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.